It was early morning, the kind of calm that comes just before the city fully wakes up. The air was cool and the sun was slowly climbing over the rooftops. A young woman named Renee pulled her black sedan into a small gas station on the edge of town. She had a long day ahead. Her dark suit was neatly pressed, her hair tied back, and there was a calm confidence in her movements. She wasn't just anyone heading to work. She was an FBI agent, though she rarely talked about it outside the office. Renee was on her way to a briefing that morning. She had been up since before sunrise, double-checking her notes for the meeting. Her job often demanded discipline and patience, and that meant even small delays could throw off her schedule. She parked beside one of the gas pumps, grabbed her wallet, and stepped out of the car. Her movements were precise, practiced, like someone who knew how to stay in control no matter what. The gas station was quiet. There was an older man behind the counter inside, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. A couple of cars passed by on the main road, their engines humming softly. Renee swiped her card and started fueling her car. She looked around briefly, her mind already running through the morning's tasks. It was an ordinary stop on an ordinary morning, or at least it should have been. Across the street, a police cruiser was parked near a diner. Inside sat Officer Dale, finishing the last of his breakfast sandwich. He was known around the small town for being loud, confident, and always looking for trouble before it even started. He prided himself on being observant, though sometimes that meant jumping to conclusions. When he looked out the window and saw Renee's black sedan, he frowned. It was a nice car. Too nice, he thought, for someone he didn't recognize. His eyes followed her as she stood by the pump, focused and calm. Dale took a sip of his coffee, squinting through the glass. In his mind, something didn't add up. He muttered under his breath, "What's she doing around here?" Then, almost out of habit, he stood up, threw his napkin on the table, and walked out to his car. Renee didn't notice him at first. She finished fueling, capped the tank, and got ready to leave. Just as she was opening her car door, she saw flashing lights in her mirror. She frowned, confused. Was there an emergency? She looked behind her and saw the police cruiser pull up fast, stopping right beside her car. The officer got out, adjusting his belt and sunglasses as he approached. There was a kind of swagger in his step, the kind that made people uncomfortable before a single word was said. "Morning," he said, his voice firm. "You mind telling me whose car this is?" Renee blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked calmly, though a small knot of tension formed in her stomach. "I asked whose car this is," he repeated, his tone carrying a mix of suspicion and authority. "That's quite a vehicle. You from around here?" Renee stood up straight. She'd handled situations far more stressful than this, but something about the man's tone told her this wasn't going to be quick. "It's my car," she said evenly. "Is there a problem, officer?" Dale tilted his head, studying her. "We've had reports of stolen vehicles matching this description," he lied smoothly. "Mind showing me your ID?" Renee sighed softly but reached into her purse. She had no reason to argue, at least not yet. "Sure," she said, keeping her voice steady. She handed over her driver's license. Dale looked at it, then at her, then back at the ID. "Renee Brooks," he read aloud. You sure this is real?" That caught her off guard. "Of course it's real," she replied. "Is there something wrong with it?" He smirked, holding the ID between his fingers like it was a fake coupon. "You'd be surprised how many people try to pull one over on me," he said. "So where are you headed in such a hurry?" "I'm on my way to work," Renee said, her patience thinning. "And I'd appreciate it if we could make this quick." "Oh yeah? What kind of work?" he asked, half laughing as if expecting a ridiculous answer. She hesitated. Normally, she avoided mentioning her position unless absolutely necessary, but his tone told her this wasn't going to end easily. She reached into her bag again, this time pulling out her small black leather badge holder. She flipped it open, revealing her FBI credentials. "I'm a federal agent," she said quietly but firmly. For a second, Dale stared at the badge. Then he laughed. Not the laugh of someone amused, but one that dripped with disbelief. "Right," he said. "And I'm the president." "Come on, lady. Where'd you get that, online?" Renee took a slow breath. "It's real. You can verify it if you want," but Dale wasn't listening. He waved a hand dismissively. "You can't just flash a fake badge and think that gets you out of a stop," he said, stepping a little closer. "I've been on the force long enough to know a scam when I see one." Renee's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed calm. "Officer, I'm telling you the truth. I'm a federal agent. If you contact the field office, they'll confirm it. He smirked again. Oh, I'll contact someone all right. But not until you step out of the vehicle. She didn't move. Is that really necessary? She asked. Yes, ma'am, it is, he said, his hand resting on his belt near his holster. His posture stiffened like he wanted to remind her who had the authority here. People were starting to notice. A man who'd been buying coffee inside stepped out and watched quietly from the corner of the station. A young couple near another pump paused mid-conversation, sensing tension in the air. Renee could feel their eyes, but she didn't react. She knew that every move mattered now. One wrong word could turn things worse. Officer, she said carefully, please lower your tone. I'm not resisting. I'm cooperating. That's good, he said, still smirking. Then go ahead and step out of the car. Renee stayed still for a moment, weighing her choices. She didn't want to make a scene, but she also couldn't let the situation spiral. Slowly, she opened the car door and stepped out. Hands visible, calm as ever. She could feel the tension radiating off the man in front of her. Dale looked her over again, still convinced she was bluffing. You people think you can just say anything to get out of trouble, he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. She didn't rise to the comment. Instead, she said softly, You're making a mistake. He laughed again, shaking his head. Yeah, I've heard that before. You think I'm scared of your toy badge? I'm not asking you to be scared, Renee said. I'm asking you to do the right thing. Call your supervisor. Verify my credentials. That's all I'm asking. But pride can be louder than reason. Dale crossed his arms, his ego fueling every word that came next. Ma'am, I don't need you telling me how to do my job. I've handled bigger cases than this before you even thought about joining the force. Renee didn't respond. She just watched him, calm, collected, and patient. Inside, though, her thoughts were racing. How had a simple stop for gas turned into this? She'd faced criminals, informants, and undercover missions, but this was different. This was personal. It was the look in his eyes, the disbelief that she could possibly be who she said she was. It wasn't about the car. It wasn't about protocol. It was about perception. A few more minutes passed. Dale started pacing slightly, muttering about fake IDs and wannabe agents. Renee stood near her car, still composed, still silent. The bystander with the coffee finally pulled out his phone and began recording. He didn't know what would happen next, but he could feel the injustice unfolding right in front of him. Dale noticed the phone and barked, "Put that away." But the man didn't. Instead, he kept filming, his hand steady. That only made Dale more irritated. Renee glanced at the man briefly, then back at the officer. "You really don't want to do this," she said softly. "And why's that?" He challenged, stepping closer again. "Because," she said, looking him straight in the eyes, 2 minutes from now you're going to regret it." He snorted, amused by her confidence. "We'll see about that." Renee didn't flinch. She just looked at him calmly, her badge still in her hand, the golden letters catching the morning light. Her heart was steady. She knew what was coming, she just didn't know when. Then in the distance, the faint sound of tires screeched. A black SUV was turning sharply into the gas station. It rolled to a stop near the pumps and 2 men in suits stepped out, both wearing earpieces. Renee recognized them instantly, colleagues from her unit. And in that moment, for the first time, Officer Dale's confident grin faltered. The look in Renee's eyes didn't change. She stayed still, calm and professional, as if she'd known this moment would come all along. The 2 men stepped out of the black SUV almost at the same time. Both were wearing dark suits and carried the calm, firm expression of people used to being in charge. Renee recognized them instantly. Agent Collins and Agent Rivera, her colleagues from the field office. They had worked together many times before, and just seeing them brought a quiet wave of relief to her chest. Collins was the first to speak. His voice was calm but carried authority. "Renee, everything all right here?" Dale froze mid-step. He looked between the 2 men, then at Renee, then back again. His face shifted from arrogance to confusion. "Wait, you actually know these guys?" Renee didn't answer. She didn't have to. Collins was already pulling his credentials from his jacket. He flipped them open and spoke directly to Dale. "FBI, Special Agent Collins. And you are?" Dale hesitated, glancing at the badge, then at the black SUV that had government plates. His confident posture was starting to falter. "Officer Dale, local PD," he said, clearing his throat. I was just, checking things out. Routine stop. Colin's expression didn't change. Routine? He repeated, his tone cool and professional. Because it looks a lot more than routine from what I just saw. The bystander with the phone was still recording. A few more people had gathered now, whispering quietly. The air felt thick with tension. Renee stood still beside her car, her face calm but her eyes sharp. She didn't interrupt. She knew her team would handle it from here. Rivera, who had been watching silently, stepped closer to Dale. You pointed your weapon at her? He asked flatly. Dale's eyes widened slightly. What? No, I didn't. I just had my hand on it. You know, standard safety protocol. Rivera's voice stayed low. You drew your weapon on a federal agent without verifying her credentials first? I thought... Dale started, but the words stumbled out clumsily. She didn't look like... she said she was FBI, but anyone can say that. Collins raised an eyebrow. So you assumed she was lying? Dale looked around, searching for support, but the only faces watching him now were unimpressed or disappointed. Even the man recording seemed to lower the phone a little, shaking his head. Renee finally spoke, her tone calm but steady. I showed him my badge twice, he laughed. That one simple sentence hung heavy in the air. Collins looked at Dale, then back at Renee, then gave a small nod. We'll handle this, he said to her softly. Dale's voice cracked slightly as he tried to explain. Look, I didn't mean any disrespect. It's just, we've had reports of people flashing fake badges around here. I had to be sure. By escalating a simple stop? Rivera asked. By intimidating a woman at a gas station before breakfast? Dale didn't respond. His mouth opened, then closed again. His confidence had melted away, leaving only unease. Collins turned toward him again. You understand how serious this is, right? You drew a weapon on a federal officer who was doing nothing wrong. That's not just poor judgment, and that's a breach of protocol. Dale took a small step back. His voice dropped low. I didn't know who she was. You didn't ask, Collins corrected. You assumed. The gas station was silent except for the hum of nearby traffic. Renee stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She wasn't angry. She'd seen too many people lose control in moments like this. She just felt tired. Tired that it had to go this far for someone to believe her. Collins looked back at Renee. You okay? She nodded. I'm fine. Just want to get to work. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. We'll make sure you do. Rivera motioned toward the SUV. You can head on. Renee, we'll take it from here. She hesitated for a moment, looking at Dale, then said quietly, Make sure the report is honest. Rivera nodded. It will be. Renee walked back to her car, keeping her head high. Her hands were steady now, but her mind was racing. She thought about how quickly things had spiraled, from a calm morning to a confrontation that could have gone so much worse. She didn't want to dwell on it, but it lingered in her thoughts anyway. As she closed her car door, she heard Collins behind her say, Officer Dale, I'm going to need your badge and service weapon. Dale froze. What? Hold on. It's standard procedure, Collins said. You'll be placed on temporary leave pending review. You'll have a chance to explain everything to Internal Affairs. But I was just doing my job, Dale protested, his voice cracking again. Rivera looked at him calmly. No, you were doing what you thought your job was. That's the difference. Renee turned her key in the ignition, but before she pulled away, she took one last glance in the mirror. She saw Collins collecting Dale's badge while Rivera stood close by taking notes. The officer's face had turned pale. He was trying to speak, to explain, but his words didn't seem to matter anymore. Renee didn't feel triumphant or proud. Just quiet. There was no satisfaction in watching someone face the consequences of their own arrogance, only a kind of sadness. She wished it hadn't happened at all. She drove away from the gas station slowly, merging onto the main road. The sun had risen higher now, casting a warm glow across the city. The day was just beginning, but she already felt like she'd lived through an entire week. At the first red light, she took a deep breath and looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She forced a small smile. It's over, she whispered to herself, though a small part of her wondered if it really was. Meanwhile, back at the gas station, the scene was still unfolding. The bystander who had filmed the encounter finally approached Rivera. Hey, I got everything on video, he said. From when he first stopped her. Rivera nodded. We'll need that. Thank you for recording. The man handed over his phone, replaying a short clip that showed the moment Dale had laughed at Renee's badge. Rivera sighed quietly. That'll help. Dale stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes darting between them. Come on, this is ridiculous, he muttered. I didn't hurt anybody. I was just doing my job. Collins looked up. Your job isn't to assume the worst about someone because of how they look or what they drive. Your job is to serve, to protect, and to use your training, not your temper. Dale didn't respond. For the first time that morning, he had nothing to say. As Collins and Rivera prepared to leave, Dale was escorted to his own cruiser, now parked awkwardly beside the pumps. He sat inside, staring blankly at the steering wheel. The flashing lights had been turned off. The noise was gone. All that remained was silence, and a growing realization that the situation had slipped completely out of his control. Across town, Renee parked in the underground lot of her field office. She stepped out, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the elevators. Her phone buzzed. A message from Collins. Everything's being handled. You did nothing wrong, she exhaled softly. The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside. As she rode up, she thought about the small details of the morning. The smell of gasoline, the cool air, the way Dale had laughed. It all felt like a blur now, something unreal. But when she stepped into the conference room and her colleagues greeted her, she forced another calm smile and said, Sorry I'm late. Long morning. They laughed lightly, unaware of what had just happened. Renee sat down, opened her laptop, and focused on the task ahead. That was who she was. Someone who kept moving forward no matter what. Still, when the meeting ended and she finally had a quiet moment to herself, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the wall. She wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. The whole incident had reminded her how quickly things could change, how misunderstanding, pride, and assumptions could turn a normal morning into something unforgettable. Out in the city, the video of the gas station encounter was already making its way online. Someone had shared it, and people were beginning to comment. Words like unbelievable and she stayed so calm filled the screen, but Renee didn't know that yet. For now, she just wanted to go home, rest, and put the day behind her. She didn't want fame or attention. She just wanted peace. And as the sun began to set later that evening, the city lights came on one by one, shining softly against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, a lesson had quietly taken root, one about respect, humility, and the power of staying calm when the world tries to test you. Renee didn't set out to teach anyone anything that day. She just wanted to get to work. But sometimes life has its own plans, and for Officer Dale, the real lesson was only just beginning. Taken by the bystander had spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't a loud or dramatic clip. There was no shouting, no chaos. It was quiet. Just a calm woman standing beside her car, showing her badge, and a uniformed officer laughing like it was a joke. But somehow that calmness said more than any argument could. By sunrise, the video had thousands of views. By noon, it had gone viral. People were talking about it everywhere. On social media, at coffee shops, even on the local news. The headline was simple. Officer mocks woman flashing FBI badge, then learns who she really is. Inside the FBI field office, things were tense. Renee had hoped the whole situation would fade quietly, but that hope vanished the moment she walked into the briefing room and saw the looks on her co-workers' faces. Morning, Agent Brooks, one of them said gently, his voice cautious. She nodded, pretending not to notice the whispers. Morning, she replied. Her supervisor, a tall man named Director Hayes, stepped out of his office and motioned for her to come in. Renee followed, closing the door behind her. He gestured for her to sit. You holding up okay? He asked. Renee sighed softly. I'm fine, sir. Just tired of all the attention. I didn't want this to turn into a story. Hayes nodded slowly. I know, but these things take on a life of their own. The Bureau's already aware. Washington wants a full report. She rubbed her temples. I didn't even file a complaint. I just wanted to move on. He leaned forward slightly. You don't have to do anything. Internal affairs will handle the police side of it. Your part's done. But I want you to know, you handled yourself perfectly out there, calm, professional. That video is proof of that. Renee gave a faint smile. Thank you, sir. I just wish it hadn't happened at all. I know, Hayes said. But sometimes how we respond to something says more than the thing itself. You showed grace under pressure. That matters." She appreciated his words, but a part of her still felt uneasy. She didn't want to be remembered as the agent from the gas station. She had worked too hard to be seen as just that moment. Later that afternoon, she stepped out of the building to grab a cup of coffee. The weather was bright and warm, but she kept her sunglasses on, trying to avoid attention. Still, a few people recognized her from the video. One woman smiled and said softly, "You handled that beautifully." Renee nodded politely, thanking her. But the reminder only made her more aware of how public everything had become. Back at the local police department, Officer Dale sat in a small plain office with the blinds half closed. His badge and service weapon were gone, temporarily suspended pending review. The desk across from him was covered in papers, but his mind wasn't on any of them. He kept replaying the moment at the gas station over and over. The laugh, the disbelief, the way his stomach dropped when the black SUV arrived. He had been called into a meeting that morning with his chief, and it hadn't gone well. "You know how bad this looks?" the chief had said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You embarrassed the department. You escalated a stop you shouldn't have made, and now it's national news." Dale tried to defend himself. "Chief, I didn't know she was real FBI. I thought she was pretending." "That's the problem," the chief shot back. "You didn't check. You assumed, and you laughed at her. On camera. What did you think would happen?" Dale didn't answer. There was nothing he could say. Now, sitting alone, he stared at his empty hands. The badge that once made him proud now felt like a weight that had been lifted away, and not in a good way. For the first time in his career, he felt small, powerless. He wasn't a bad man, not deep down. But pride had gotten the better of him that day, and now the whole world had seen it. Meanwhile, Renee spent the rest of her afternoon trying to focus on work. But every few minutes, another notification popped up on her phone. Articles, interviews, messages from people she didn't even know. Some were supportive. Others were angry, not at her, but at the system that had let things like that happen too often. Her best friend at the office, Lila, finally said, "You should just turn your phone off for the day." Renee nodded, powering it down. "Yeah, I think you're right." But peace didn't come easily. Even as she sat quietly at her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this moment meant more than just a misunderstanding. It felt like a mirror, reflecting the small cracks in a system that needed fixing. That evening, Collins called. "Hey," he said, "just checking in." "You good?" "I'm all right," she replied. "You?" he chuckled softly. "Busy. They've got me writing reports for half the day. Seems everyone wants to know every detail." Renee leaned back in her chair. "I just hope this doesn't turn into a circus." "It won't," he said. "People will talk for a while, then move on. But you made an impression, Renee. You handled that better than most." "Yeah," she said quietly. "I guess that's something." Across town, Dale sat at a small diner staring at a cup of cold coffee. The waitress came by and asked if he wanted a refill, but he just shook his head. He didn't have the appetite for anything. His mind kept drifting to Renee's calm face, the way she didn't yell, didn't fight back, didn't even flinch when he doubted her. He realized now that she had given him every chance to step back, every opportunity to handle it differently, and he ignored all of them. His phone buzzed. It was a message from another officer. "Man, you're all over the news." Not in a good way. He turned the phone face down and closed his eyes. He wished he could take it back, not just because of the embarrassment, but because he'd let his ego blind him. Later that night, a news station aired an interview with a retired police captain discussing the incident. The host asked, "What do you think went wrong here?" The captain sighed. "It's a simple case of assumption. The officer saw what he wanted to see, not what was in front of him. And the woman, the agent, handled it with more professionalism than most people would." Renee's parents called her after seeing it. Her mother's voice was warm but worried. "You sure you're okay, baby?" "I'm fine, Mom," Renee said softly. "I promise. You didn't deserve that," her mother said. "You worked so hard for your position. People need to know that." "I know," Renee replied, "but I don't want to be in the spotlight for something like this." Her father spoke next, his voice calm and wise. "Sometimes you don't choose the moment. The moment chooses you. You did the right thing. That's what matters," Renee smiled faintly. "Thanks, Dad." The next morning, she arrived at work early, hoping to avoid the stares and whispers. But when she walked into the building, something unexpected happened. A few agents stood up and clapped softly. It wasn't loud or showy, just a quiet sign of respect. She froze for a second, surprised. Then one of the senior agents said, "We're proud of how you handled yourself. You represented the Bureau with dignity." She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, feeling a small weight lift from her shoulders. Meanwhile, Dale was summoned to a disciplinary hearing. The room was cold and formal, filled with people in suits. He sat at the table, hands folded, listening as the review board read the report. Each word hit harder than the last. Unprofessional behavior. Failure to verify identity. Unnecessary escalation. When they finished, one of the board members asked, "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Officer Dale?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "I was wrong." The words felt heavy but true. I was wrong and I should have listened. I let pride make the call instead of judgment. The board member nodded. That's a start. When the hearing ended, Dale walked out of the building into the sunlight. For the first time in years, he didn't have a badge on his chest or a weapon at his side, but he also didn't have denial clouding his vision anymore. Back at the FBI office, Renee stood by the window of her floor, watching the city below. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold and pink. She took a deep breath, letting the light wash over her. The past few days had been exhausting, but something inside her had shifted. She had learned that sometimes standing still and staying calm in the face of ignorance wasn't weakness. It was strength. And somewhere out there, the man who had once doubted her was beginning to understand that too. The world kept turning. The noise of the story would fade, but the lesson, quiet and lasting, would stay. Renee didn't need anyone's apology or praise. She had her peace, and that, she thought, was enough. The air around the gas station felt thick, as if time itself had slowed down. The moment the two agents stepped out of the black SUV, everything changed. The laughter that had filled Officer Dale's face a few minutes earlier was gone. His hand, which had been resting on his weapon, slowly dropped to his side. He looked unsure, like he wasn't sure whether to salute or apologize. The taller agent, wearing dark glasses, looked directly at him with a steady expression. "Agent Renee, are you all right?" the man asked, his tone calm but firm. Renee nodded slightly, still standing beside her car. "I'm fine, sir." He thought my badge was fake. The other agent, who had a kind but serious face, glanced from Renee to Dale. "He what?" Dale straightened himself, trying to keep his voice confident. "I was just verifying her identity. She was acting suspiciously, and I had to make sure she wasn't impersonating an officer." The taller agent took a slow step forward. "So your idea of verifying was drawing your gun?" Dale froze, words failing him. The people at the gas station were whispering now. Some had their phones up, still recording, while others pretended to look busy but couldn't stop watching. The taller agent, whose badge now clearly read Special Agent Reynolds, spoke again, this time quieter but sharper. "Do you understand you just pulled a weapon on a federal officer on her way to duty?" Dale tried to answer, but his voice cracked. "I didn't know she was real. I thought she was lying." Reynolds sighed, taking off his glasses. His eyes were calm, but the disappointment in them was clear. "You were shown an official badge. You chose to laugh instead of check the number on the back. That's not confusion, officer. That's arrogance." The second agent, who had been standing a few steps behind, took out a small notebook and began writing something down. Renee watched silently, her face unreadable. She wasn't angry, she was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from being questioned again and again for things that shouldn't even be questioned. The gas station attendant peeked through the window, whispering to a customer, "That woman's FBI, can you believe it?" Outside, the tension grew heavier. The local police radio on Dale's shoulder crackled, asking for his status. He didn't answer. Instead, Reynolds turned toward Renee. "Agent, would you like to press the issue formally?" She hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing against her badge. "I'll follow protocol, sir," she said softly. "I just want it documented properly." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we'll do." He turned back to Dale. "Officer, place your weapon on the hood of the car and step back." Dale blinked. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," Reynolds said firmly. "You're being detained pending review of your conduct." The words hit Dale like cold water. He opened his mouth to protest, but the other agent, Agent Clark, took a step forward and held up a hand. Don't make this worse. Just follow instructions. For a moment, Dale's pride seemed to wrestle with his fear, but eventually he unhooked his gun, placed it on the car hood, and stepped back. He looked pale now, realizing how fast things had flipped. The bystanders were completely quiet. The man who had been recording the whole time slowly lowered his phone, whispering, "Man, tables really turned fast." Reynolds walked around, making a quick call on his radio. Within minutes, 2 local patrol cars arrived, but this time they weren't there for Renee. One of the new officers, a young woman, looked at the scene with wide eyes. "Wait, Dale? What's going on?" Reynolds turned to her calmly. "Your officer here is being held for misuse of authority. We'll be handling the statement process." Dale's partner looked shocked. "Sir, he's one of ours. Surely we can—" Reynolds interrupted, his voice professional but firm. "You can file your department report later. For now, he's under federal observation." Dale tried one more time to defend himself. "This is crazy. I was just doing my job. How was I supposed to know she was really an agent?" Renee finally spoke, her tone even but filled with quiet power. "You could have asked respectfully. You could have called it in. You could have done anything except pull your weapon on someone who was cooperating." Her words hung in the air. Everyone could feel the truth in them. Dale lowered his eyes, realizing that nothing he could say would justify what had happened. Agent Clark began gathering witness statements from bystanders, including the man who recorded the incident. "You caught everything on camera?" Clark asked. The man nodded, showing the video. "Start to finish. You can hear everything too." Clark thanked him, taking his contact information for evidence. Meanwhile, Reynolds kept a calm hand on Dale's shoulder. "You'll have a chance to explain yourself at the precinct. But I'll warn you, this won't be an easy report to write." Renee stood quietly beside her car, still holding her badge. For the first time since the morning began, she allowed herself a slow breath. The adrenaline was fading, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She looked up at the sky as if trying to release the weight in her chest. Agent Clark approached her gently. "You did well, Renee. You kept your cool when most people wouldn't have." "Didn't feel like it," she said softly. "I just didn't want to give him a reason to pull the trigger." Clark gave a faint nod. "That's exactly why you handled it right." Around them, the onlookers started to drift away, talking quietly among themselves. Some looked inspired, others disturbed. A few even clapped quietly as they left, though no one said a word aloud. Dale sat on the curb now, his hands folded in front of him. He looked like a man trying to rewind time, hoping to undo the last 10 minutes. His partner stood nearby, shaking her head slowly. "I told him not to assume things," she muttered under her breath. Reynolds returned from his call. "The department's internal affairs has been notified," he said. "They'll handle his suspension paperwork once we file the statement." He looked at Renee. "You're free to go, Agent, but I'd recommend you come by headquarters later to finalize the report." Renee nodded. "I will, sir." Before she left, she walked past Dale. He looked up at her, his eyes full of regret but also confusion. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said quietly. She paused, her expression calm but distant. "It's not about what you meant. It's about what you did." With that, she opened her car door and stepped inside. The sound of the engine starting broke the silence. As she pulled away, the agents watched her go. The entire station seemed quieter now, like everyone there had just witnessed a life lesson unfold in real time. As her car merged onto the main road, Renee gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed a mix of strength and sadness. She wasn't angry at Dale anymore. She was tired of moments like this. Tired of proving herself over and over again to people who never expected her to belong where she did. At the next red light, she took another deep breath. Her phone buzzed with a message from a coworker. "Morning briefing pushed back to 10. You good?" She smiled faintly, typing back, "Yeah, just another day." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just another day. It was a reminder of how fast things could go wrong, and how important it was to stay calm even when everything inside you screamed not to. Back at the gas station, Dale was being led to one of the arriving police cars. He didn't resist, but the weight of embarrassment was clear on his face. He had never imagined that the woman he mocked would be the one to have authority over him in the end. Agent Reynolds stood nearby, giving his final instructions to the local officers. "Make sure he's treated fairly," he said, "but make sure it's handled properly. One of the officers nodded. Yes, sir. As the car doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, Reynolds looked at Clark. 2 minutes, he said quietly. That's all it took for everything to flip. Clark nodded in agreement. 2 minutes, and a lifetime lesson. They got back into their SUV and drove off, the flashing lights in the distance fading behind them. The station returned to its normal rhythm, cars pulling in, people fueling up, life moving on. But for everyone who had seen what happened, it wasn't just another ordinary morning. It was a story they would tell for weeks, about a moment when pride met professionalism, and when calm truth stood taller than loud authority. And for Renee, it was another reminder of why she did what she did, not for recognition or power, but for justice, the quiet kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The morning sunlight was brighter now, painting the streets gold as Renee drove toward her office. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel, though her mind was still replaying everything that had happened at the gas station. She had been through tense moments before in her job, but this felt different. It wasn't a mission. It wasn't a planned operation. It was just a simple morning, turned upside down by someone's quick judgment. Traffic moved slowly, and she stared at the cars ahead, watching the brake lights flicker like red reflections of her thoughts. She wasn't angry anymore, just thoughtful. She kept hearing Agent Reynolds' words in her mind. You handled it right. Maybe she had. But it still didn't feel good to have to prove herself like that. By the time she reached the FBI field office, most of her team was already inside. The building looked calm from the outside, but the moment she stepped through the doors, she could feel the quiet buzz of attention. People had already heard. News travels fast, especially when there's video involved. As she walked toward her desk, her colleague Mia looked up from her computer. You okay? She asked softly. Renee nodded. Yeah, just a long morning. Mia gave a small smile. You're all over social media already. Someone's video got out. It's intense. Renee sighed, setting down her bag. I figured that would happen. Mia hesitated before saying, Everyone's saying you stayed incredibly calm. Even the director saw the clip. He said it's the definition of professionalism. Renee tried to smile, but her eyes told another story. Professionalism shouldn't have to be tested like that. The team meeting started soon after. Agent Reynolds was there too, standing by the whiteboard with a quiet authority. When Renee walked in, he gave her a nod of respect. Before starting the agenda, he said, Before we begin, I want to acknowledge what happened this morning. Agent Renee showed remarkable composure in a very difficult situation. Her conduct represents the agency at its best. We'll be addressing the incident officially, but I wanted everyone to know she handled it perfectly. The room filled with light applause. Renee nodded humbly, avoiding the spotlight. She didn't want praise. She just wanted the day to move on. After the meeting, Reynolds called her into his office. Close the door for a moment, he said kindly. She did, sitting across from him. He leaned back in his chair, looking at her carefully. You sure you're all right? Something like that can shake anyone up. I'm fine, she replied softly. Just processing it, he nodded. Internal Affairs is taking over the case. The officer's been suspended pending review. They've already requested the footage from our office. Renee's expression stayed calm. I don't want to ruin his life, she said quietly. I just want accountability. Reynolds smiled faintly. That's the difference between justice and revenge, and that's why you're good at what you do. There was a moment of silence between them. Then he added, You might be asked to give a short statement to the press later today. Nothing long, just to confirm the facts. We want to make sure the story stays accurate. She nodded slowly. All right. Later that afternoon, Renee stood in front of the glass doors of the field office where a few local reporters had gathered. The sun was high now and the city noise filled the background. She kept her tone calm, clear and simple as she spoke. Yes, she said. I was approached by an officer who questioned my identification. The situation was resolved once my colleagues arrived. I appreciate the quick response from both departments. I hope this serves as a reminder that respect and communication can prevent unnecessary escalation. She didn't mention fear, or race, or anger. Just truth and grace. The reporters thanked her, and she went back inside wanting nothing more than a quiet evening.